We are so happy to have Andrew Himes, the Director of Collective Impact at the Carbon Leadership Forum, speaking with the Boston Northeast Hub. And we have also invited the New York Hub to join as well. So hopefully there's some cross-hub Northeast collaboration happening today. So just briefly, Andrew leads a lot of CLF's community and strategic communications efforts. He facilitates the NGO Government Roundtable group, which I'm assuming, might be mentioning today. He's also one of the original creators of the regional hubs of CLF. He has given a TED Talk called Change Our Buildings, Save Our Planet, which I highly recommend looking up. He is also an author of a book, a filmmaker, and I'm just really happy that he agreed to come today and talk with us about the power of collective impact and CLF's theory of change. So thank you so much, Andrew. We really appreciate it.
Well, I'm also really happy to be here, and I'll share my screen to start with. I think I can do that.
And Sonny, you're recording, right? So that we can share with those who weren't able to join. It looks like you are. Yeah.
And you can now see
Thanks, Andrew.
Thing, right?
Yes. Yep. Perfect.
All right. Great. So, first of all, I'm really happy to be here, and this is the first time in the last 7 years that somebody's invited me to talk about collective impact as a presentation. So this is a great opportunity for me to talk about my favorite topic in the world, connected with embodied carbon. So within, I guess on this, what I want to do is just tell you a little bit of my origin story with CLF. So it was almost 8 years ago that I was in a room at the University of Washington with Kate Simonin and about 12 other people. And they're all academics and researchers and professors, and I'm not any of those things. But I was there because it was a gathering of people who wanted to talk about ways that technology could be used to address the climate challenge. And so we went around circle, and in the introductions, I said, well, so I'm Andrew, and I'm interested in how, what would be a business-based solution, a way of thinking about climate change as a business opportunity instead of just a dire existential threat. And so I don't know much about this stuff, but what if we could take too much carbon out of the atmosphere, or stop throwing it up into the atmosphere, turn that carbon into usable carbon-based materials that could be put into products? And also, it feels to me like the core strategy for making change is all about collective impact. What are all the vast number of collaborators and partners and co-learners who could help to identify innovative solutions to climate change? Kate, on the other side of the room, said, well, first of all, have you ever considered that the biggest products on the planet are buildings? And secondly, I haven't heard that term collective impact before, but I'm all over it. So, and let me tell you about the Carbon Leadership Forum. So that was the beginning of a conversation that continues to this day, and that I find just really, really interesting and provocative. So if I can figure out how to change my slide here. There it is. So a couple of years later, we came up with what we thought of as the CLF theory of change. And it included three things. First of all, it's all about building community for impact. It's about collective impact. Secondly, we really need to improve the quality of the data, the methods by which we gather the data and understand and evaluate the data in order to drive design decisions and many other kinds of decisions in the industry. And finally, we want to inform effective and just policy. So building for a better planet means, first of all, you build community for impact, and action has to span all of the folks who might be involved, who need to be involved in the solution, from profession sectors and geographies across the board. We build this, build and unify and convene a diverse network of leaders. who are able to together to collectively understand and aim for the future that we need. And then data and methods, and finally, effective and just policy. That's how you propel innovation. So that's the underlying theory that kind of it's driven the strategic planning that we do, the programs that we develop, the documents that we publish, the research projects, and all of the ways in which the community comes together as well. So what is collective impact? It's, you may not have heard this precise terminology before, but I'm sure that you all have an understanding, a fundamental understanding of what is collective impact. And examples from history, for example, way back in the 1960s in the United States, the civil rights movement was a prime example of collective impact. Lots of organizations of various types coming together, sharing leadership, sharing inspiration, taking part together in a diverse movement across a geographical region, especially focused in the South, but also involving the rest of the country. The anti-apartheid movement, concerned with the situation in South Africa and how do we achieve liberation and an end to apartheid, it was a collective impact initiative. The women's movement, beginning way back in the 60s and even before that, it was a collective impact initiative. It was a movement. And the GLBTQ movement for rights, including leading up to marriage equality in the 2000s, and starting way back in 1969 with Stonewall, all of these are collective impact initiatives or movements in some way. And in the building industry, beginning way back when the U.S. Green Building Council came together in the late 80s to the early 90s, was a collective impact. The fundamental idea of USGBC was to create a collective impact initiative, not necessarily using that term. And there is kind of a precision to the way that we want to use the term collective impact today, based on a set of analyses and documents or proposals that were created way back in the early 2000s, about 20 years ago, by the Stanford Social Innovation Review. And I'm going to actually read typically I hate reading slides, but I'm going to read this one because it's got a really precise and excellent and eloquent definition. Collective impact brings people together in a structured way to achieve social change. It's a network of community members, organizations, and institutions who advance equity by learning together, aligning, and integrating their actions to achieve population and systems level change. So it's not, on the one hand, it's not just a kind of loose confederation or a broad movement, including a lot of energy or smoke, but not necessarily a lot of fire. On the other hand, it's not a very precise and well-designed plan that you create in advance and then move toward. It's something a little bit different. So there are essentially 5 conditions for a successful collective impact initiative. It has to start with a common agenda. What are we all here for? What are we all trying to accomplish together? A collective impact initiative is inherently very practical and very specific. We want to accomplish measurable, to create measurable change that's positive, that's oriented to the specific goals that we have for the initiative, with that common agenda that we began with. And we want to allow by measuring our results to allow for continuous learning and accountability. All of the different partners or collaborators have gifts, have strengths, have capacities that they can share with other members of the partnership. And so all of those different activities by different types of actors, different types of organizations with different types of skills and capacities and reaches can reinforce the common effort and the common understanding. For collective impact to be effective, you have to be talking to each other just all the time, learning from each other, meeting on a regular basis. There are working groups. There's often a steering committee or a leadership group. there are specific projects that you're working on in order to make a specific kind of change. And a strong backbone is, you know, I'm going to be talking about this a little bit later, but any broad, diverse coalition or collaboration needs a little group of people who are providing some infrastructure, some kind of holding space for the ongoing conversation, holding space for opportunities for collaboration that haven't been noticed at the very beginning, but pop up in the course of the work. And so there's a team that helps to align and coordinate the work of everybody else. So over the last, what, 12, 13, even 14 years almost for CLF, there have been a whole variety of ways that collective impact has shown up. Going way back, I would say, to 2015 with a low carbon building summit held here at the University of Washington, where folks from different companies and different organizations came together for that first conversation. In 2017 and 2019, well, first of all, the embodied carbon network was an earlier term that we used for what we now think of as regional hubs and the CLF community online. And then in 2018, that started out as a singly as a CLF project, and it evolved into a collective impact project. So way back in 2018, in California, Governor Brown and Michael Bloomberg came up with the idea for a global climate action summit. And it was going to be a single day on which lots of people from around the world would come together around innovative ideas and solutions to climate change. They invited proposals for conferences. And Kate Simone and I produced, and another partner of ours, Jeff Thiel, created a proposal for Carbon Smart Building Day that is focused on embodied carbon specifically, and who could we get together in a room for the first time in a national conference to talk about what's an understanding of and a set of solutions for embodied carbon. We sent that proposal in just ourselves, and the governor's office got back to us and said, well, lots and lots of people. Actually, there were probably 20 different proposals for different types of conferences related to buildings and infrastructure at the Global Climate Action Summit. But we love yours. Would you mind getting in touch with everybody else and inviting them all to be part of the same thing? And so we did that. And ultimately, we had a steering committee with 30 different organizations represented, who all took part in planning and then carrying out that amazing conference. SE 2050, Mike, I'm gonna welcome any additional comments that you want to make about this, but SE 2050 began as a little conversation among a number of folks from the CLF network, not even with Kate or I or anybody else from the staff involved in it yet. And their question is, how can we accelerate the involvement and solutions amongst structural engineers focused on designs, on materials, and on analysis that we need to be able to do around embodied carbon. And they brought that idea to Kate in the very beginning, and then encouraged Kate and CLF to issue a challenge to structural engineers, which was then responded to by a whole lot of companies and individuals. Out of that came a working group that Mike and Francis led for the first few years. And the role of CLF was just to be a place where an idea could pop up and then go to town. And so what was really incredibly important about SE 2050 was it was a great example of folks coming together with a very specific focus and then saying, all right, so who are all the folks who need to be involved in this? What's the movement that we need to build? What are the objectives that we need to have? And finally, how do all these structural engineering firms report actual progress in in decarbonizing their designs and their execution of projects. The EC3 tool was another really great example of a collective impact initiative. Something like 30 different organizations, both companies and foundations, came together to fund the initial development of the EC3 tool. It was incubated by the CLF, but with lots of help and leadership from other people, especially the two people who are most significantly leading the Building Transparency group today, Stacy and Phil. And it wasn't just like a little group of people deciding for everybody else what should happen. It was an invitation to join a movement in building a powerful tool that, with a vision that 100,000 building designers, architects and engineers especially, could use that tool and provide feedback to its further development and improvement. And then add to the database of EPDs, all of the EPDs for all the different materials and mixes and all the rest of it that are now part of that very large open source database. The NGO Roundtable, about, I guess, 5 years ago in September, the CLF called together a meeting here in Seattle. There were probably 5 or 6 organizations. I'll tell you how it really got going. I was having coffee with Andrew Lee from ILFI at a coffee house here in Seattle, and Andrew said, I'm really frustrated. We just planned our fall conference and announced the dates for it in October, and one day later, the New Buildings Institute announced the plans that they had for their fall national fall conference for exactly the same dates. Why don't we ever talk to each other? Why shouldn't we be collaborating? Why shouldn't we be working together on things like this? We should be reporting to each other and inviting each other to our events and collaborating on initiatives. And so we called a meeting, and folks from ILFI and USGBC and the New Buildings Institute and Architecture 2030 and the World Green Building Council, those 5 or 6 organizations in a room, and we had a great conversation about a common strategy for addressing embodied carbon at the COP meeting later that year, including other things. 5 years later, we just had our most recent meeting of the NGO Government Roundtable, and there were over 50 organizations represented, organizations that included everybody from Sound Transit with a $57 billion construction project to build a light rail system in the Seattle region, all the way up to the White House Council on Environmental Quality. And all of those organizations, well, in a typical meeting, we have 21 or 22 presentations by groups in a 90-minute period, talking about, like, here's a paper that we just produced, here's a policy initiative that we're part of, here's a conference that we're producing that we want everybody to invite everybody to. It's a sharing of opportunity and excitement that is transformative. And just yesterday, Megan Byrne from our CLF staff had a conversation with Cecilia Wandiga from Kenya, who's in charge of the CSDI, which is a major NGO and government-related organization in Kenya, who said the embodied carbon, or excuse me, the NGO Government Roundtable on Embodied Carbon has had a transformative experience in making big changes across Kenya, in policy, in technical understanding, in an example for organizational development, in all of those. And we just want to tell you how much of a difference it's made to us. And then obviously the CLF regional hubs. We had the Leadership Summit for Wood, Carbon, and Forests in 2021. MEP 2040, learning a lot from the positive example of SE 2050 got going back in 2022, it was just a meeting of 3 or 4 people to start with. And then again, it was CLF issues, a challenge, and then a whole lot of people come together to say, we need to make collective commitments. And those commitments need to be practical and precise and measurable. And we promise that we'll be part of the movement. We'll show up at forums. We'll develop low carbon plans for our companies. We'll request on EPDs on every project from every potential supplier to a building project, and we'll demand low carbon refrigeration as a solution for any new building system. And then finally, of course, the whole building LCA benchmark study. It's obviously it's a CLF research project, but there are over 100 companies that are contributing their own LCA reports to that study. And that'll be a fantastic way to accelerate progress across the building industry. And the ECHO project, I'm sure most of you have heard of, perhaps. And Michelle is the kind of staff person from CLF who's the backbone, the staff backbone for that initiative. It started out again as a little tiny conversation of a few people at Greenbuild 2 years ago in a room, and the question wasn't about ECHO. It was, what are our organizations doing that we could not, what do we want to accomplish that we couldn't possibly accomplish by ourselves, but working together we could potentially do. And so the vision then emerged the following January, almost 2 years ago, here in Seattle, a bunch of people sitting together physically in a room from 20 different initiatives that were all ways to measure or certify or advance decarbonization focused on embodied carbon in particular. Those organizations by March and April of that year had agreed to create the Embodied Carbon Harmonization and Optimization Project. And the central objective of that project has been to align data development, data reporting, and data and embodied carbon action across the entire industry. And I was, I've kind of gotten ahead of myself a little bit. NGO Roundtable I talked about, SE 2050, MEP 2040 I talked about, and the ECHO project. All of those organizations, including ILFI and the Living Building Challenge, including USGBC and LEED 5.0, which now includes embodied carbon categories and points to reward people for low carbon designs and implementation. And so let's just kind of go back to that original slide. In each of these cases, a group of people said, there's something that we really feel that we need to do and want to do together that will make a big difference. We've got a common agenda. In every case, it was like, what are the very practical things that we can do that can be measured, that will allow us to track progress against the goals that we have? It involves, all of us being ready to learn, to listen, to adapt and adjust to the promises kept by other organizations, and to produce work that others can leverage and that we can share with others. We all commit to continuous communications. We want to use our communications to be open, to be transparent, to build trust, to strengthen relationships. And actually, I'll tell you that building trust and strengthening relationships is really the kind of the heart's blood of collective impact. It's now been, what, 2.5 years since the MEP 2040 challenge began. And I've been on the MEP 2040 steering committee ever since the beginning. And I got to tell you, sometimes it's difficult for us to start the meeting because we're all having such a great time just hanging out together and saying good morning and making fun of each other and just like just loving to be around a set of friends that we've developed a real relationship with over time. But then when we get into the actual meat of the meeting, it's easy to make a decision because we kind of we understand each other, we understand and deeply trust each other, and we also understand that some of us have very different skills than others. And so we have learned, I think, to leverage the skills and the capacities and the competencies of other people and the organizations and companies that they represent as well. And finally, a strong backbone. Um, I might ask at this point, Michelle, if you wouldn't mind just stepping in and saying, what is the word? So I want to make sure that we're not misunderstanding this word backbone. Backbone is not the same thing as like who's in charge, right? Backbone is all about how can I serve and support the mission of the organization? How can I help to hold space for the conversation and the collaboration? So, Michelle, you're kind of the backbone person for CLF to support the ECHO project. Could you say a little bit more about what that implies or what that means for you?
Sure, happy to. And I just shared the link for the website to the Echo Project in the chat, along with some of the other initiatives that you were talking about, Andrew. But if you, like Andrew was saying, if you scroll down on that website, you can see that Echo is a collaboration. It's not an entity. It's not a specific organization. It is a collaboration of 17 different organizations. So there are 5 organizations that were sort of the original founding nonprofit organizations, and then 12 more that have joined to support. So essentially what CLF's role is in ECHO right now is as convener. We use the word convener because it is really the role is to continue to make sure that the group is in communication, and that discussing and reaching consensus to the extent possible, but making sure really critically that everyone feels heard and that everyone's different perspective is acknowledged and heard by the group and considered equally among all of the organizations. So Architecture 2030 was actually the original convener of ECHO. They did that for about the first year and then handed the baton to CLF to be the convener for 2024.
Right. Great, thanks. And Mike
Sure.
Griniak, if you don't mind, I want to call on you also because I'd love to hear your thoughts about the last, has it been what, 4 years for SE 2050? What's a key learning or a key blessing or a key something or other that you bring away from that experience?
Putting me on the spot, Andrew.
Yeah.
I love it. Uh, my instinct is to say the people is the key takeaway, frankly. And I would say it all started with the people at CLF introducing this concept to us, and I it's nothing more scientific than people who are trying to do the right thing at the right time, and generally showing a lot of respect to one another. So I really think that's been the core. And my biggest takeaway is that through that process of having people that respect each other and are very positive, that's where you can really make some progress, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's really true. And I'm going to do another terrible thing. Jacob, if you don't mind, I know that a really important collaboration for you has been with Chris Magwood, and who is now at RMI in focusing on the residential part of the market. And I also think that your organization has been really focused on not just on how do we build a good house out of good materials, but rather it's about the social mission of your company as well. So how do you think about social impact and collective impact?
Yeah, I appreciate the prompt, and I probably speak to that both from the new frameworks and the Builders for Climate Action sides of that. On the new framework side, um, there's a real like equity piece in access to technologies that are difficult to scale down and broadly to whether it's like the residential building sector or folks of more modest income means to be able to access low carbon technologies. And so just seeing that there's such a huge need within that space, developing business model and a technology model and a technology stack that sort of centers access as a key part of the strategy for carbon drawdown and not just a wholly technocratic approach has been a pretty big part of it. And that's a kind of a similar theme with Builders for Climate Action. I mean, we developed the BEAM tool explicitly because there was a need to democratize access to data amongst projects and firms that don't have necessarily the same soft cost access for more like bespoke engineering or research on a per project basis. And so just finding ways to sort of, yes, center the broader access to these technologies and tools and data stacks is sort of the angle we've taken in the strategies of everything from the user interface to the low barrier to capitalization for manufacturing a panel or what have you. So it's sort of the outcomes of scale and a different approach to scale, and is sort of informed what that collective impact strategy for development to look like for us.
Right. Could you say a little bit more about Homer's Can? I think you've been engaged with that as well as at least as part of that conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So that's formally through RMI, and Chris is sort of holding that, but I've been very involved sort of from the Builders for Climate Action side of things, which is, it's sort of looking at the opportunities that come when we really engage everyone within the development process of homes, which is, very centered around contractors. I think that's an interesting thing around the residential side is that a huge amount of the square footage that gets developed is very heavily contractor informed and not necessarily architecturally developed. So the strategies of creating a movement organization that has been like overtly inclusive of what is a pretty conservative part of our movement. I mean, a lot of the stakeholders in Home Builders Can are not necessarily waving a flag around climate action. Yet it's been really effective and really it's led to some of the most like juicy and interesting and fruitful conversations I've had in a long time, talking with folks with whom we have some pretty strong differences in perspective, but like a tremendous amount of shared overlap and interest and value in the work. And that has been very fascinating,
Right.
to say the word. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that strikes me is that it's kind of more obvious to see the relationship of collective impact to a project like the ECHO project or like SE 2050 or one of the initiatives that I mentioned. But it also strikes me that there, in all of our lives, there are projects that we work on with teams of people where and it might be just the design of a big project, an infrastructure project or a building project, and there are all the different types of people engaged in that project, from building engineers to material suppliers to contractors to policymakers who set the stage for what happens, and on and on. There are aspects of any partnership or any collaboration that might benefit from a more conscious application of these 5 conditions or principles of collective impact. That is, if in thinking about the project in the very beginning and how we carry it out together, if we're conscious about the need for a common agenda, we're all in it for, we're aiming, we have a shared vision for what the product of this partnership is. We want to make sure that we're not just talking and talking and talking, but we're actually producing something that matters. We want to make sure that there are opportunities for us to to support each other and to take advantage of the activities of each of the parties involved in the partnership? How do we make sure that we're really on the same page as we go through the different stages of the process? And is there something missing in the way of a strong backbone? Do we perhaps need more of a backbone than we have right now in order to make the partnership successful and effective? So what my great hope at this moment in this conversation, I want to open up the conversation to a lot of other people who are here, because one thing that strikes me is that I'm guessing that every single person on this call has been part of a collective impact initiative, whether you called it that or not. So I'd love to invite anybody in this call, just go ahead and speak up and tell us a little story about a project that you were involved in that brought to the surface the need for these kinds of conditions. And if I don't hear any voices, I'm going to call on somebody. And you might not like it, but I'm going to call on you. How about Mark Webster? Mark, I know you're cringing a little bit right now, but I know that you've been really involved in a couple of projects with CLF over the years that have made a really big difference. Could you pick one of those projects or initiatives and talk about what you've learned or what you think about it in the terms of collective impact?
That's yes, I am cringing a little bit. Well, let me think. I mean, most of what I've been doing really is centered around, the work of CLF of late. I'm trying to think. Before that, maybe some of the work with Structural Engineering Institute,
right?
Where and the Sustainability Committee, because I think that maybe fits the bill to some degree in terms of gathering, at a time when the structural engineering community wasn't really doing anything about sustainability, as an industry. It really, I think, kick-started that discussion and pulling together, a few people having been asked to. The leadership of Structural Engineering Institute realizing that this is something that they need to get on and looking for somebody to lead the committee. I and Dirk Kestner and a couple of other folks started up that committee and called our friends who we knew were interested in it. And really, it's been one of the most successful committees in SCI, and probably even laid the groundwork for SCI bringing SE 2050 on board. So perhaps that's a good example of one organization that I've been involved with that really, I think, has had quite a bit of collective impact.
Yeah, I absolutely think that that's true. And that goes way back in time for you as well, and for the initiative. So any other thoughts or contributions? Anybody else been involved in a collective impact initiative that strikes you as being helpful? Right, so hearing nobody.
Somebody has their hand raised, actually,
Oh,
Andrew.
good.
The office at the BAC, I think, had raised their hand.
Yeah. Hi, can you guys hear us? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, and you can zoom in on me over there with that. Yeah, we're kind of newcomers here. You guys know me from CLF, the Northeast group, but Anya Meseretskaya or Anna, yeah. Anna. So we have a group of, so we're the Gateway office at the Boston Architectural College. We're a community-based design uncenter because we have fellows who are joining us from all over the world in the Zoom screen, and then also a group of fellows who are here with us in person. So part of our collective impact is that we we work in a distributed way. So we're both kind of in person and online always. And today I'm gonna ask one of our fellows, Dana here, to describe what we've been doing in preparation for tomorrow. And Dana will tell you a little bit about what tomorrow is and how we feel like that relates to collective impact and the things on the screen.
Okay. So my name is Dana and I am a Go Fellow. So currently there's a reuse organization called BBR, is Boston Building Resources. And tomorrow they are hosting National Reuse Day. So as Go Fellows, we decided as different groups to make different projects using reusable materials. And my group specifically, we're creating a stool. So we have 2 stools, one that you can sit on and a multi-purpose stool. I currently don't have any photos, but basically we're using plywood, we're using
All reused,
All
all reused and
reused.
found
All
materials.
Mhm. all found materials. Other people are doing chandeliers, shelving with found materials. And our common agenda for this is to show the people that are attending the hackathon or National Reuse Day to show that we are using different materials to make everyday items that you can use. Then establish shared measurement, track your progress. So I mean, to track our progress, we're asking each other, we're communicating like where we are with our idea within our group. And then we're communicating like what should we do, the next steps for the project. And then so mutually reinforcing activities.
I think the activity that we're engaging is kind of that. Like
Yeah.
we're a group that's interested in reuse. So I know like CLF Northeast has a huge reuse focus. Like we have a subgroup, right, that's primarily focused on reuse, and it's a huge part of the embodied carbon narrative. So as a student group, I think we're trying to incorporate this into the design education and like learning how to design for reuse and with reuse.
Yep.
And so the fellows are essentially putting that into practice and also connecting with just everyday people who are not designers or architects to kind of spread that idea around and build culture around that, and like, create cultural change, I think, around that as well.
Yeah, from the beginning, from design education. So it is sort of a mind bending, trying to explain how to design buildings with reused materials. But we're really working, I mean, yeah, we're working on it. So this is part of that collective impact efforts, I think.
Yeah. Thank you guys for
Thank
giving
you.
us a chance to participate.
Wow, that's awesome. That's really, really great. That's a really fantastic example of what we're talking about. Collective impact is, you know, one thing that you said, I think is really, really important. It's a cultural shift. Collective impact is a cultural shift. It's opening up your imagination to the ways in which movements are built by lots of people coming together and creating something that couldn't possibly exist without all of that collaboration, all of that idea sharing, the innovation that and the inspiration that comes out of those relationships. So I'm going to call on one final person at random, and I hope you don't mind if it's you, Laurel Christensen. What is an example of collective impact that you've been involved in?
I don't know what made you call on me since sorry, is my audio working?
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Well, I appreciate that you all mentioned the reuse day because I'm excited to attend that at Boston Building Resources tomorrow. And also a shout out to the CLF reuse group. We actually had that's one of the, I guess, collective impact efforts that I'm involved with. And we actually had Boston Building Resources as a guest speaker for our monthly call just yesterday. So we have a video up on YouTube that talks about their process and a little bit about Reuse Day as well. If folks want to check that out, I can share the link. But I wanted to just mention a collective impact project that I'm part of called Mindful Materials, which has been really a volunteer-based and kind of grassroots industry-based initiative for 10 years now. This is the 10th year that this kind of movement has existed, and I think it's very timely for this webinar and for this presentation, because I've heard of this term collective impact, but I didn't know about the structure, and so it's very we actually just last week hosted a summit, and a lot of the folks that are involved in a lot of the initiatives and kind of milestones that you mentioned for CLF were in attendance. And I would say the common agenda that we really have is twofold. One, it's that we need to consider holistic impacts of materials. So carbon is absolutely a huge part of that, and the work that's been done by the Carbon Leadership Forum and by Building Transparency and with open EPDs really paves the way for what we see as a future where hopefully we'll be able to measure the holistic impacts of buildings. So what are the impacts on social health and equity? What are the circularity impacts, right? How do we tell those stories? So I think that we have as this common agenda, and the other piece being this democratization of data that Jacob mentioned. I think that is a huge piece that we're seeing as we need more transparency around these other impacts of materials. How do we make sure that that information is provided in a digitized way, in a connected way, so that it can then be acted on and used to make better decisions earlier in the design process? So thank you so much, Andrew, for your presentation. This was, as I mentioned, really timely and really helpful for me to hear and think about, how do we, in the work that we're doing with Mindful Materials, kind of make sure that we're very intentionally addressing this shared measurement piece, the continuous communication, like holding the space for that. So thank you again so much for this.
And thank you. That was a great way to wrap up or move toward wrapping up this session, I think, with and Mindful Materials is another really great example of collective impact. So my next slide, or this close to final slide, if I can figure out how to make it happen here. The title of this slide might have been maybe Focus on Surprise, not just focus on emergence. But one thing that I want to point out is that with the purpose of that framework is not to produce an easily predicted consequence or result of a collective impact initiative. What is true about a true collective impact initiative is that surprising things happen. And so I'm going to read this paragraph. This, by the way, comes from that original Stanford University study that led to the development of the collective impact methodology. The power of collective impact lies in the heightened vigilance that comes from multiple organizations looking for resources and innovation through the same lens. The rapid learning that comes from continuous feedback loops, the immediacy of action that comes from a unified and simultaneous response among all participants. Under conditions of complexity, predetermined solutions can neither be reliably ascertained nor implemented. Instead, the rules of interaction that govern collective impact lead to changes in individual and organizational behavior that create an ongoing progression of alignment, discovery, learning, and emergence. When you put a bunch of great, crazy people in a room together, and you open up all the channels of communication and shared vision making, and the deep eagerness to share solutions and resources along with those visions, then crazy, wonderful things happen. And you don't necessarily know exactly where it's going to go. So it feels to me like the typical strategic planning process for an organization, combined with or interacting with these principles of collective impact and what are successful collective impact initiatives, that interaction can be really interesting. It can lead you as an organization or as a collaboration or initiative to places that you never imagined that you might go. And so I want to leave you with 2 links to resources that you can follow. And by the way, I'll turn this PowerPoint slideshow into a Google Slides thing so that Michelle and others can send the link out there so that everybody can see these slides and these 2 links. But the Collective Impact Forum, collectiveimpactforum.org, is a really great resource for learning about the basic principles for understanding questions like measurement and social justice and the relationship of equity and opportunity to collective impact. Also, lots and lots of really great stories. And literally, there are thousands and thousands of stories of local collaboratives, regional collaboratives, national or international collective impact initiatives that are really, really interesting to read and learn about and to learn from. And then finally, if you wanted to go back to the original set of articles from the Stanford project, I've provided a link to that as well. So I guess my final question would be, would anybody else like to add a point or add a real quick question at the very end here? And if not, I think we're complete. And I'm going to turn it right back over to Michelle.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I feel like I just echo what others have said about how appreciative we are and how timely, you know, this idea, this sort of real structure around a lot of the work that we've all been doing, you know, for a number of years now. And it also kind of made me think a little bit about how CLF started the regional hubs, and now CLF, you know, the national organization sort of acts as that backbone. And then the regional hubs have been able to really grow uniquely within their own region and city and become their own sort of forces for collective impact with that initial, you know, CLF structure as the backbone. So, and here in the Northeast, then we've then taken it and then created working groups of our hubs. So we're all, I think, really grateful for that backbone that is in place so that we can all thrive in our regions. So thank you again.
Great. Lots of fun. Thanks a lot. Have a great
Thanks, everybody.